Every time you said the Lord's Prayer, you were speaking an ancient activation code, but no one told you how to unlock it. We'll decode this prayer line by line, revealing what each phrase actually does and giving you a practice to try with every revelation. This isn't about religion or memorized words. Read this as a functional set of instructions hidden in plain sight. Each line contains a frequency, a map for consciousness. The church taught you to recite it, but Jesus taught something completely different. He said, pray like this because it was never meant to be repeated mindlessly. It was designed to transform you. Later, we'll uncover the mistranslation that rewired how billions relate to God. But first, we start with a single word that changes everything about how prayer actually works. The word that rewrites everything about prayer starts the moment you open your mouth. Jesus could have started this prayer with, "My Father." He could have made it personal, individual, private. But he didn't. He chose "Our Father." That single word choice wasn't accidental. It was intentional spiritual engineering. The moment you speak "our" instead of "my," something shifts in the quantum field of consciousness. You stop operating as an isolated individual and start functioning as part of a collective spiritual organism. This isn't just poetic language. There's actual energetic mechanics happening here. When you say "our," think of it like quantum entanglement, a way to describe how individual minds become linked when aligned in intention. Your consciousness becomes connected to every other consciousness that has ever spoken these words. You're plugging into a network that spans centuries, cultures, and continents. Every saint, every mystic, every broken soul who ever whispered this prayer becomes part of your spiritual support system. Think about why your individual prayers sometimes feel like they're bouncing off the ceiling while group prayers carry weight. It's not about volume or numbers. It's about resonance. When multiple consciousness frequencies align around the same intention, they create what mystics have always called divine communion. You're not just praying to God. You're joining a conversation that's been happening since humans first looked up at the stars and sensed something greater. The word "our" dissolves the ego's primary illusion that you're separate from everything else. Your ego wants to pray, "Give me, help me, fix me." It wants to negotiate with God as one individual entity to another. But the moment you say "our," the ego's grip loosens. You can't be selfish when you're speaking for everyone. You can't make it about your personal agenda when you've just acknowledged you're part of something larger. Ancient temple priests understood this principle. The high priest on Yom Kippur carried the names of all 12 tribes written on his chest, never entering the Holy of Holies representing himself, but as part of the collective soul of his people. But here's where it gets profound. When you truly feel this connection, when "our" becomes more than just a word but an actual experience, something unlocks in your spiritual receptivity. You stop approaching prayer as a desperate individual trying to get God's attention. You start praying as someone who belongs, someone who has always belonged, someone who was never actually separate in the first place. Research on group prayer effectiveness reveals something the materialist worldview can't explain. When people pray together, even when separated by vast distances, measurable changes occur in the physical world. Plants grow faster. Healing accelerates. Situations that seemed impossible suddenly shift. This isn't placebo effect. This is consciousness operating according to laws that science is just beginning to understand. The mystical traditions have always known this. They understood that individual spiritual practice has its place, but collective spiritual alignment creates exponential power. When you say "our," you're accessing what the Kabbalah calls the collective soul of humanity. You're tapping into what Buddhists recognize as the interconnected web of all consciousness. You're activating what Christians call the body of Christ, but rarely experience. This is why lone wolf spirituality often feels empty. You can meditate in isolation, you can study esoteric texts by yourself, you can even have profound personal revelations. But there's something about collective spiritual alignment that individual practice can't replicate. It's like the difference between a single candle and 1,000 candles lighting each other. The light doesn't just multiply, it transforms. When you speak Our Father, you're not approaching God as a spiritual beggar hoping for scraps of divine attention. You're stepping into your identity as a member of the cosmic family. You're recognizing that you belong to something that has always existed, something that was never broken, something that doesn't need to be fixed, but only remembered. This word transforms your entire prayer posture. Instead of reaching up toward a distant deity, you're settling into your place within an eternal conversation. Instead of shouting across a void, you're joining a chorus that's been singing since before time began. You're not an outsider trying to get in. You're a family member coming home. Right now, silently say the word Our and notice if your posture shifts or your breath deepens. That's the power hidden in this single word. But what comes next will shock you about what Jesus actually said. Jesus never said, Father. That word doesn't exist in the original prayer. When Jesus spoke these words, he used Abba, and that mistranslation has shaped how billions of people approach the divine for 2,000 years. It created a barrier that was never supposed to exist. Abba isn't just the Aramaic word for father. Abba conveys intimate, life-giving connotations often lost in the English word father. Children used this word for their parents, but it carried layers the English translation completely misses. Abba suggests breath giver, life source, the one who breathes existence into being. It's the sound you make when you exhale completely, when you release everything back to its source. It's not gendered the way we think about gender. It encompasses both masculine and feminine principles of creation. This matters more than you realize. When you pray to Father, you're unconsciously creating distance. Father implies hierarchy, authority, judgment. Someone above you who you need to approach carefully, formally, with the right words and proper behavior. Father suggests you're separate, that you need permission, that you might be rejected. But when Jesus said Abba, he was teaching something completely different. Abba is intimate. It's the cosmic womb from which all consciousness emerges. It's the breath that fills your lungs right now, the life force that animates every cell in your body. You don't approach your breath formally. You don't ask permission to breathe. You simply receive what's already being given. That's the relationship Jesus was pointing toward. Not servant to master, but breath to breath giver. Not created to creator, but expression to source. The mystical traditions understood this. Jewish Kabbalah speaks of the divine as both masculine and feminine aspects united in perfect balance. The Shekinah represents the feminine presence of God, the indwelling divine that never leaves you. Islamic mysticism recognizes Allah as both Rahman and Rahim, the compassionate Father and the merciful Mother. Hindu tradition sees the divine as Shiva Shakti, masculine and feminine principles dancing as one consciousness. Christianity lost this balance when translation choices contributed to a more distant hierarchical image of God and forgot the maternal aspects of divine love. Those translation and theological developments contributed to a more distant image of God and created new roles for intermediaries. A distant Father in heaven requires priests as mediators. A transcendent male God justifies patriarchal leadership. But Abba as breath giver, life source, cosmic womb, that makes every breathing being a direct expression of divine consciousness. That eliminates the need for intermediaries. That makes the divine as close as your next breath. Think about how this changes your prayer posture. When you pray to Father, you look up. You project your voice toward the sky, hoping it reaches someone far away. You wonder if you're worthy, if you've said the right words, if you've been good enough to deserve attention. You approach prayer like a courtroom where you might be found guilty. But when you understand Abba as breath giver, everything shifts. You're not reaching up toward someone distant. You're settling into recognition of what's already present. You're acknowledging the life force that's already breathing you, sustaining you, loving you into existence moment by moment. You're not asking a judge for mercy. You're a wave recognizing its connection to the ocean. Your consciousness remembering its source. The energetic difference is profound. Father creates tension, performance, anxiety about getting it right. Abba creates relaxation, recognition, coming home to what was never actually separate. When you pray to a distant Father, you're always slightly holding your breath, wondering if you'll be heard. When you pray to Abba as breath giver, your prayer becomes as natural as breathing itself. This mistranslation affected how entire civilizations understand their relationship with the divine. It created the God as judge paradigm that has terrorized countless souls into submission. It established the myth that you're fundamentally separated from your source and need to earn your way back. It turned prayer into begging instead of breathing, reaching instead of receiving, performing instead of being. But Jesus was teaching something revolutionary. You don't need to reach toward God because God is already breathing you. You don't need to perform worthiness because your existence itself is proof of divine love. You don't need to bridge the gap between human and divine because the gap never existed. You are divine consciousness temporarily experiencing itself as human form. When you say, "Our Abba," you're not addressing someone above you. You're acknowledging the breath of life that moves through you, the consciousness that peers through your eyes, the love that beats your heart. You're not praying to God. You're praying as God's own self-expression, returning home to the source that never let you go. But the next phrase will completely shatter where you think this source actually lives. When you hear "Who art in heaven," your mind automatically looks up. You picture clouds, golden gates, a throne room somewhere beyond the stars. But that's not what Jesus was pointing toward. He wasn't giving you a cosmic address. He was teaching you how to access a frequency that exists right where you are. Jesus made this crystal clear in another teaching that most people miss. He said the kingdom of heaven is within you. Not will be within you after you die. Not might be within you if you're good enough. Is within you. Present tense. Available now. The heaven he's talking about isn't a destination you travel to. It's a dimension you tune into. Think of heaven as a radio frequency rather than a physical location. Your radio doesn't travel to the radio station to pick up the signal. The radio waves are already filling the space around you. The radio just needs to be tuned to the right frequency to receive what's already broadcasting. Heaven works the same way. It's not somewhere else. It's a vibrational state that occupies the same space as your ordinary awareness, just at a different frequency. Some modern interpretations of quantum theory echo what mystics long taught, that multiple dimensions can coexist at different frequencies. Right now, infinite parallel realities are occupying the exact same space you're sitting in. They're separated not by distance, but by frequency, by vibrational rate, by the lens of consciousness through which you perceive. When you shift your awareness from one frequency to another, you don't go somewhere else. You see somewhere else that was always here. This is what "Who art in heaven" is actually teaching you. You're not addressing someone in a distant location. You're acknowledging the divine presence that exists in higher dimensional awareness, accessible through consciousness itself. You're tuning your spiritual radio to receive the frequency where divine consciousness broadcasts most clearly. Every genuine mystic throughout history understood this principle. The Sufi masters called this achieving fana, the dissolution of self that reveals divine consciousness. These weren't religious fantasies. They were systematic techniques for accessing higher dimensional awareness. The phrase "Who art in heaven" contains hidden meditation instructions. When you speak these words with understanding, you're not looking up toward the sky. You're shifting your attention toward the dimension where divine consciousness is most apparent. You're moving from ordinary awareness into what mystics call cosmic consciousness, Christ consciousness, Buddha consciousness. Different names for the same experience of perceiving reality from the divine frequency. This completely transforms how prayer functions. Instead of sending messages upward toward a distant receiver, you're adjusting your consciousness to match the frequency where divine communication flows most clearly. You're not trying to get God's attention. You're tuning your attention to where God's presence is always transmitting. When you stop looking up and start looking in, everything changes. Prayer becomes less like making phone calls to heaven and more like tuning a radio to divine frequency. You stop performing for an audience above and start aligning with consciousness within. You discover that the divine presence you've been reaching toward has been breathing you, sustaining you, loving you into existence from the inside all along. The heaven Jesus pointed toward isn't earned through good behavior or reached through death. It's accessed through awakened consciousness. It's your natural state when you're aligned with the source frequency that creates and sustains all existence. The moment you understand this, you realize you've never actually been separated from heaven. You've only been tuned to a different channel. This is why Jesus taught prayer as spiritual technology rather than religious ritual. He wasn't giving you words to repeat. He was giving you consciousness instructions, frequency adjustments, awareness techniques disguised as simple phrases. When you pray, "Our Abba who art in heaven," you're not addressing someone far away. You're tuning into the divine dimension that interpenetrates every moment of existence. Heaven is your natural state of consciousness when aligned with source frequency. The prayer isn't asking you to reach heaven someday. It's teaching you to recognize the heaven that's always been here. But the next line reveals something even more profound about how this divine connection actually works through the most basic function of being alive. The sacred name itself holds the key to everything that follows. Here's something the ancient rabbis knew that modern Christianity forgot. God's name was never supposed to be spoken aloud. Not because it was too holy for human lips, but because it was never meant to be spoken at all. 4 Hebrew letters that represent the divine name, Yahvh, weren't actually letters in the way we think of letters. They're breath sounds. Yod, He, Vav, He. Jewish tradition treats this name as too sacred to pronounce, and practice-minded mystics discovered something profound in this restriction. They began to experience breath itself as the living sign of that name. The materials present the divine name as a breath vibration, an evocative way to practice conscious breathing. When you breathe in, you make something like the YH sound. When you breathe out, something like the VH sound. Your respiratory system becomes a continuous prayer, speaking the unspeakable name with every breath cycle. Now listen to what happens when you say, "Hallowed be thy name," with this understanding. You're not asking God to make his name holy. You're declaring your intention to recognize the holiness that's already present in every breath you take. The word hallowed doesn't mean to show respect from a distance. It means to make sacred through direct experience, to set apart something ordinary and recognize its divine nature. This line is actually teaching you a breathing meditation disguised as prayer. When you understand that the divine name connects to the sound of breath itself, "Hallowed be thy name" becomes an instruction to breathe consciously, to transform your unconscious respiratory rhythm into intentional sacred practice. You're not reciting words about God. You're activating the divine frequency that's already flowing through your body with every breath. Try this right now. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose. Pause for a moment, then exhale slowly through your mouth. Do this 3 times, and with each breath, silently acknowledge that you're participating in something sacred. Feel how your nervous system responds. That shift you just experienced is what hallowing actually means. You're not changing anything external. You're recognizing the sacred nature of what's already happening. The ancient traditions built entire spiritual practices around this principle. Hindu pranayama techniques use conscious breathing to activate higher states of consciousness. Sufi dhikr practices combine breath with remembrance of divine names to achieve mystical union. Jewish davening incorporates rhythmic breathing patterns that create altered states of awareness. Christian hesychasm teaches breathing prayers that unite heart and mind in contemplative awareness. These weren't random religious inventions. They were systematic applications of a universal principle. Conscious breathing creates direct access to divine consciousness. Your breath is your most intimate connection to the source that sustains all life. When you breathe unconsciously, you're receiving life force without awareness. When you breathe consciously, you're participating in the divine exchange that happens billions of times throughout your lifetime. Here's what happens when you truly understand this line. Your entire nervous system begins to shift. Conscious breathing activates your parasympathetic nervous system, the part that governs rest, healing, and spiritual receptivity. Your heart rate becomes coherent. Your brain waves synchronize. Your body releases tension it's been carrying for years. You're not just praying about God's name. You're using the divine name as a vibrational key to unlock states of consciousness that most people only glimpse in meditation retreats or mystical experiences. Ancient temple practices understood this connection. The Holy of Holies wasn't just a room where God's presence dwelt. It was a space specifically designed for breathing practices that could access divine consciousness. The high priest's ritual movements followed breathing patterns. The burning incense created aromatic frequencies that enhanced respiratory awareness. The entire temple ceremony was built around the recognition that breath is prayer, that breathing consciously is the most direct path to divine communion. When you say, "Hallowed be thy name," with understanding, you're not making a request. You're making a recognition. You're acknowledging that every breath you've ever taken has been a prayer, that your respiratory system has been your most reliable spiritual practice, that the divine name you've been seeking to know has been speaking itself through your body since the moment you were born. Once your breath becomes the temple, the next line will show you why the kingdom begins to come through you. This phrase made early Christians dangerous to empire. Authorities treated "thy kingdom come" as political treason because these believers declared loyalty to another kingdom, one that made earthly power structures obsolete. When Christians spoke these words, they weren't making polite religious requests. They were announcing allegiance to a completely different way of organizing reality. Think about what you're actually saying when these words leave your mouth. You're not asking for some distant future event where Jesus returns with angels and harps. You're calling forth divine order to manifest through your consciousness right now. You're declaring that God's way of operating should override every false system currently running the show. That's revolutionary language disguised as spiritual petition. Jesus made this clear when he taught that the kingdom of God is within you. What will be within you after you die? Is within you. Present tense, available now. This line becomes the activation command to bring that inner kingdom outward into physical reality. You're shifting from passive victim of circumstances to active co-creator with cosmic intelligence. The kingdom Jesus taught about operates by completely different principles than the kingdom of this world. This world's kingdom runs on scarcity, competition, fear, control. It tells you there isn't enough to go around, so you better fight for your peace. It creates hierarchies based on wealth, status, power over others. It maintains order through punishment, threat, manipulation. But God's kingdom runs on abundance, cooperation, love, freedom. It operates from the understanding that there's enough for everyone when divine order governs distribution. When you say, "Thy kingdom come," you're not waiting for God to fix everything someday. You're becoming the conduit through which divine order flows into physical reality. You're recognizing that consciousness creates reality, and conscious alignment with divine principles can transform any situation. This is manifestation at its deepest level. Not the shallow version that tries to manipulate outcomes for personal gain, but the profound recognition that human consciousness aligned with divine consciousness becomes a creative force that can reshape reality according to higher principles. You're not trying to get God to give you what you want. You're aligning your will with divine will so completely that you become the vehicle through which divine intention expresses itself.